Edward VI, born in 1537, the only legitimate son of King Henry VIII and his third wife Jane Seymour. He became King of England and Ireland at the tender age of 9 years old, following his father's death in 1547. It was a short-lived reign, lasting only until his death in 1553, 6 years later, marked by significant religious upheaval and the further establishment of Protestantism in England. His brief reign was characterized by economic instability and social unrest, most notably the widespread revolt known as the Prayer Book Rebellion, which was sparked by the imposition of Protestant liturgy. Despite all the challenges, Edward was an earnest young king, with a keen interest in religious matters, often participating actively in the theological direction of his reign. His unfortunate death at the age of 15 led to a crisis of succession that briefly placed Lady Jane Grey on the throne, only to be superseded by the accession of his Catholic half-sister Mary I, who sought to reverse many of the Protestant reforms. Thus his legacy is particularly noted for setting a clear Protestant trajectory for the Church of England, influencing its future structure and doctrine. Well worth talking about, and in great detail. Hello and welcome. If it's your first time, good to meet you, and for those returning, nice to have you with me again. Today we're talking about Edward VI. Quite shocked I haven't spoken about him before, actually. Now, if you'd like to support the channel, just a quick reminder. The best way to do it is a like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a comment below. It really helps the algorithm. Further to that, there's a few links in the description. But let's all get nice and relaxed first. Settle in for another long one. And we can talk all about the life of Edward VI. Born on the 12th of October 1537, at Hampton Court Palace, Middlesex, Edward VI was the much-anticipated male heir of King Henry VIII and his third wife Jane Seymour. Grand celebrations marked his arrival, with over 1,000 cannons fired from the Tower of London, and joyous public festivities. A time of celebration. After all, Henry was trying very, very hard to have a male heir, and, well, it took him quite a few wives to eventually get there. But, hey, perseverance. Now, despite Jane Seymour's quick initial recovery, proudly announcing the birth of Edward, unfortunately, she died, tragically, on October 24th, from postnatal complications. This event deeply saddened Henry, who described his mixed feelings in a letter to Francis I of France. Edward thrived from an early age, contradicting the historical portrayal of him as fragile. He was robust, exhibited by a strong appetite and vitality noted by Lord Chancellor Lord Audley in September 1538. Despite a serious illness at the age of 4, which certainly worried everybody counting on him to carry forth the throne, he generally enjoyed good health during his childhood, and certainly surrounded by all the best doctors that 16th century England could give you, doing their best for the time. Now, his early years were under the care of one Margaret Bryan, and later Blanche Herbert, Lady Troy. Edward's upbringing was of course closely guarded, with Henry ensuring high standards of cleanliness and security, treating his son as, quote, "this whole realm's most precious jewel." His childhood was of course extremely comfortable, surrounded by toys, personal minstrels, and the constant company of nurturing figures. But it couldn't all be fun and games. A boy has to learn. So his educational pursuits began at the age of 6, under Richard Cox and John Check, focusing on languages, scripture, and liberal arts. He received additional tutoring in French, Spanish, and Italian, and learned various musical instruments. A keen interest in geography was evident in his collection of globes and maps, very fascinated with the subject. And he also displayed a strong grasp of monetary issues and engaged deeply in theological studies, influenced by the Protestant reformations of Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. By 1549, he had written on religious subjects and participated actively in theological debates, maintaining some traditional Catholic practices, like celebrating Mass and venerating saints' relics and images. He also shared a deep bond with his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, who often visited him. Elizabeth especially gifted Edward a shirt she had embroidered herself, a gift that he treasured. Despite differing views, notably his discomfort with Mary's preference for foreign dancers, which seems to be a pretty petty criticism, Edward expressed deep affection for her, declaring in a 1546 note to his sister, "I love you most." I hope Elizabeth didn't see that letter. Well, in 1543, the father, Henry VIII, promoted family unity by inviting his children to celebrate Christmas together, a significant gesture considering he had previously declared his daughters illegitimate and excluded them from the line of succession. He wasn't the best of fathers. Well, this shift towards a family reconciliation continued with the passage of the Third Succession Act in the following spring, which reinstated Mary and Elizabeth in the line of succession and established a regency council for Edward. This period of restored familial relations was likely influenced by Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth wife, whom Edward affectionately regarded as his most dear mother. Edward's companions included the granddaughter of his chamberlain, William Sidney, and Barnaby Fitzpatrick, the son of an Irish peer, who had become a close and enduring friend. Sidney described Edward as a marvelous and sweet child, of very mild and generous condition. Edward's education, shared with noble children at a miniature court, reflected his royal status, and he was ambitious in terms of scholarly pursuits, perhaps driven by a desire to emulate his sister Elizabeth's scholarly success. His living quarters were suitably royal, adorned with expensive Flemish tapestries and personal items embellished with jewels and gold. His military interests were also apparent in portraits depicting him with a golden dagger, reminiscent of his father. A personal chronicle detailed significant military campaigns and events, including John Dudley's narrow escape at Musselburgh during the 1547 campaign against Scotland and France. A major political development during his father's reign was the Treaty of Greenwich on July 1st, 1543 with Scotland. This treaty, following the Scottish defeat at the Battle of Solway Moss in 1542, proposed a union between the realms through Edward's betrothal to the infant Mary, Queen of Scots. The treaty stipulated that Mary be sent to England to be raised under Henry's supervision, aiming to strengthen the alliance between the two countries. However, the Scottish response to this treaty was to renounce it by December of the same year, opting instead to renew their historical alliance with France. Henry reacted with fury, perceiving this as a betrayal. By April of 1544, he commanded Edward Seymour, the first Earl of Hertford, and Edward's uncle, to launch a punitive expedition against Scotland. Henry's instructions were chillingly explicit, ordering Seymour to, I quote, "put all to fire and sword, burn Edinburgh town, so razed and defaced that when you have sacked and gotten what you can of it, as there may remain forever a perpetual memory of the vengeance of God lightened upon them for their falsehood and disloyalty." Very clear instructions. Of course, this directive led to a brutal military campaign, unprecedented in its ferocity, all directed against the poor Scots. Quite hard done by throughout their history by the English. Deep-seated animosity. Well, the conflict initiated by these events would extend to the reign of Edward VI, and came to be known as the rough wooing, a term that starkly contrasted with the violent military actions that intended marital union between Edward and Mary that was supposed to bring peace. On the 10th of January, 1547, then 9 years old, Edward expressed his gratitude in a letter to King Henry VIII and his stepmother for the New Year's gift of their portraits which were sent from Hertford. This atmosphere of gratitude shifted dramatically by the end of the month, however, when on January 28th, King Henry passed away. Edward Seymour and William Paget, key figures in the royal circle, initially kept the king's death a secret to manage a smooth transition of power. Seymour, along with Sir Anthony Browne, travelled to Hertford to bring Edward to Enfield, where he and his sister, Lady Elizabeth, learned of their father's passing, and were briefed on his will. Thus, Henry's death was officially declared to Parliament on the 31st of January 1547 by Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley, with proclamations confirming Edward's succession distributed widely thereafter. Edward was escorted to the Tower of London, amid salutes from the Tower's ordnance and nearby ships. The following day, the realm's nobility paid homage to the new king, and Seymour was named Protector of the realm. A lot of pressure for a 9-year-old. Well, Henry was interred on the 16th of February at Windsor, alongside his wife Jane Seymour, fulfilling his final wish. His coronation occurred on the 20th of February at Westminster Abbey, with the ceremony shortened to accommodate the young king and to reflect the Reformation's influence, which rendered some traditional rites now inappropriate. The day before his coronation, Edward made a ceremonial procession from the Tower of London to the Palace of Westminster, akin to previous monarchs like Henry VI. Riding through the throngs of onlookers and elaborate pageants, Edward enjoyed the performance of a Spanish tightrope walker at St. Paul's Cathedral, certainly a sight to be seen, and not something you see every day at that period of time. Archbishop Cranmer, during the coronation, drew comparisons between Edward and the biblical reformer King Josiah, urging Edward to advance the Protestant Reformation. particularly advocating for the dissolution of Rome's ecclesiastical power and the removal of religious imagery. The ceremony was followed by a lavish banquet in Westminster Hall, where Edward, notably wearing his crown throughout, embraced his new sovereign duties. Now Henry VIII's will designated 16 executors to govern until Edward reached the age of 18, supported by 12 additional advisors. The will's authenticity and final adjustments are subjects to historical debate, with some suggesting it was modified by those close to Henry to enhance their power and secure wealth, particularly benefiting the reformist faction. Do you think people would do that? Argue over somebody's will when there's money involved? I suppose some things never change. Well, by the end of 1546, conservative figures such as Stephen Gardiner were excluded from royal access, and Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, faced treason charges and asset seizure, dramatically altering the political landscape just before Henry's death. Critics point out that Gardiner's exclusion and Norfolk's charges were not solely based on their religious conservatism, highlighting that other conservatives maintained influential roles and questioning the impact of radicals like Sir Anthony Denny, who had control over the king's dry stamp. Regardless, following Henry's death, the will's executors distributed extensive lands and honours among themselves and their allies, enabled by a last-minute clause allowing for, quote, unfulfilled gifts. How convenient. This particularly favoured Edward Seymour, the Earl of Hertford, who ascended to Duke of Somerset and was appointed Lord Protector and Governor of the King's person, consolidating his control over the young King Edward VI and the English realm. Henry's will did not specify a protector for Edward, but did establish a regency council intended to govern collectively by majority rule, with equal authority among its members during the king's minority. However, just days after Henry's death on February 4th, under Edward Seymour's influence, 13 of the 16 executors, some absent, endorsed Seymour as protector, rationalizing this as in line with the will's authority. Somerset's ascent to power likely involved strategic alliances and rewards to certain executors, notably securing an agreement with William Paget, Henry's private secretary, and gaining support from Sir Anthony Browne of the Privy Chamber. Somerset's military successes in Scotland and France further bolstered his qualifications for the role, and by March 1547 he had secured letters patent from King Edward granting him extensive powers to appoint members to the Privy Council and consult them at his discretion, effectively setting up an autocratic rule. Under Somerset's leadership, the Regency largely served as a platform for his unilateral declarations, rather than a collaborative governing body, effectively reducing the Privy Council to a body that ratified his decisions. This consolidation of power was noted by Francois Vanderdelft, the imperial ambassador, who observed that Somerset governed with absolute authority, with Paget acting almost as his secretary. Although Somerset faced limited opposition, significant resistance did come from Thomas Wriothesley, the Chancellor, who challenged Somerset's near-royal control over the council, Wriothesley's protests led to his quick removal from office on charges of misconduct, showing once again the tensions within this new administration. Thomas Seymour, Somerset's younger brother, became a prominent dissenter, even though he was awarded a baronetcy, the Lord Admiralship, and a seat on the Privy Council. Thomas relentlessly sought greater power. No matter what they gave him, it was never enough. He endeared himself to King Edward VI by providing him with pocket money and suggesting that Somerset was mismanaging the royal finances, depicting the young king as impoverished. All of this manipulation extended to encouraging Edward to assert his authority and question the protectorate. Thomas's maneuvering took a more personal turn in the spring of 1547, when he secretly married Catherine Parr, the widowed queen of King Henry. His home became a hub for Protestant reformers, hosting notable figures like Lady Jane Grey and Lady Elizabeth. The situation escalated in summer of 1548, when Catherine, during her pregnancy, caught Thomas red-handed in an inappropriate encounter, I suppose we can word it like that, with Elizabeth. Obviously, she was not impressed. This resulted in Elizabeth's immediate transfer to Sir Anthony Denny's household. Well, Catherine Parr eventually passed away in September of 1548, shortly after childbirth, and Thomas quickly renewed his pursuit of Elizabeth through correspondence, writing her letters, hoping to marry her. However, Elizabeth, wary and heeding the council's advice, remained quite non-committal. She ghosted him, basically. Well, by January 1549, alarmed by Thomas's actions and potential misuse of his position at the Bristol Mint, the council placed him under arrest. But in terms of treason, they lacked solid evidence. So he was condemned by an act of attainder, and finally he was executed on the 20th of March, 1549, ending his ambitious pursuit of power. Better luck next time. Somerset's military capability was evident in his Scottish campaigns and the defence of Boulogne-sur-Mer in 1546. As protector, he focused on the Scottish conflict, aiming to unite the English and Scottish realms. Good luck with that. His campaign started well, with a victory at the Battle of Pinkie in September of 1547, leading to English garrisons being established across Scotland, reaching Dundee. However, Somerset's military strategy soon faced difficulties. The Scots fortified their position by allying with France, which sent troops to reinforce Edinburgh in 1548. The young Scottish queen was also safely moved to France and betrothed to the Dauphin, derailing plans for a union through marriage. And the financial burden of maintaining a large military presence and numerous garrisons was also becoming unsustainable, slowly gnawing away at the English resources. With the French king attacking Boulogne in the August of 1549, Somerset had no choice, and he was forced to withdraw from Scotland, marking a significant retreat from his policies. In 1548, England began experiencing social unrest, which escalated into widespread revolts in 1549, fueled by dissatisfaction with religious changes and disputes over land. The most notable were the Prayer Book Rebellion in Devon and Cornwall, and the rebellion of Robert Kett in Norfolk, driven by opposition to the landlords' encroachments on common lands. Led by the evangelical MP John Hales, these commissions inadvertently linked social justice issues with Reformation theology, prompting a vision of a godly commonwealth. This further complicated the situation, as local communities felt empowered to enforce the Commission's findings themselves. Edward, reflecting on these events in his chronicle, noted that the risings began, I quote, because certain commissions were sent down to pluck down enclosures. The cumulative effort of these uprisings pointed to a severe failure in governance, for which Somerset was held solely responsible by the council. In a letter from July 1549, Paget criticized Somerset's handling of the situation, expressing regret that Somerset had not acted more decisively earlier on to administer justice in a way that would have deterred further rebellion. Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, met his downfall through a series of dramatic events culminating in the autumn of 1549. On October 1st, sensing increasing threats to his power, Somerset issued a proclamation seeking support and took King Edward VI to Windsor Castle, ostensibly for safety. There, the young king, noting in his diary, felt confined. A quote from his diary, he wrote, "Methinks I am in prison." Well, he pretty much was, at least in a practical sense. The council, distancing itself from Somerset's increasingly questioned leadership, declared his rule a failure, stating that his authority stemmed from them, not directly from the late Henry VIII's will. By October the 11th, the council decisively acted against Somerset, arresting him and relocating Edward to Richmond Palace. Edward documented charges against Somerset, including ambition, vain glory, rash wars in my youth, neglect of New Haven, personal enrichment from my treasury, following his own opinion, and acting on his own authority, etc. That's in Edward's words. Well, after a brief release from the Tower of London and a return to the council, Somerset was again arrested due to his continued scheming to regain power, and eventually, in January 1552, he was finally executed. Edward noted his beheading succinctly in his chronicle, and John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick, succeeded him, steering the council and nation away from Somerset's policies. But Somerset's legacy, once seen as a protector of the common people against the gentry, has been re-evaluated somewhat. Critics now view his leadership style as arrogant and lacking the political finesse necessary for effective governance. Initially, his rise to power was marked by his strategic prowess, aided by allies such as William Paget, but his rule was marred by financial disarray, military failures, and widespread domestic unrest that he simply did not have the skill to respond to effectively. Well, under John Dudley, later Duke of Northumberland, the governance of England experienced a shift. Previously seen as opportunist, recent historical reassessments have acknowledged his role in stabilizing the government. He restored the authority of the royal council and stabilized the kingdom's finances, navigating the nation back towards sustainability after Somerset's tumultuous rule. Warwick's main political challenge came from Thomas Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, a conservative with influential connections. Warwick, however, used Edward VI's staunch Protestantism to solidify his position, aligning closely with the young king and taking control of the Privy Chamber as part of his strategy to move away from Somerset's more controversial policies. Initially reluctant, William Paget eventually sided with Warwick, recognizing the unlikely support of conservative policies by foreign entities like the Holy Roman Empire, particularly regarding issues such as Boulogne. Southampton sought to weaken Warwick by advocating for Somerset's execution, aiming to implicate Warwick in Somerset's alleged crimes. In fact, in a strategic response, Warwick managed Somerset's release from Parliament on that time in January 1550, while simultaneously orchestrating the ousting of Southampton and his conservative allies from the council, consolidating his control over the government. By securing the backing of the council through the distribution of titles and positions, Warwick effectively became the government's leading figure, without assuming the title of protector. Edward's engagement with governance matured as he aged, with historians debating the extent of his involvement. Views ranged from him being merely a figurehead to being actually highly engaged, a precocious ruler. By the age of 14, Edward's role became more pronounced within the establishment of the Council for the Estate, which he formed himself, indicating a move towards greater personal involvement in state affairs. This council was met weekly, discussing significant matters, allowing Edward to be directly involved in the deliberations of important issues. His influence was most notable in religious affairs, where the council adhered to the fervent Protestant policies that Edward endorsed, reflecting his strong convictions in matters of faith. The Privy Chamber became a critical arena for his influence, where he worked closely with key figures like William Cecil and William Petre, his principal secretaries, who helped him navigate the complexities of governance. The Duke of Northumberland, who succeeded Somerset, ushered in a governance style characterized by subtlety and strategic maneuvering. He consolidated his control over the council by maintaining a loyal majority and expanding the council with his allies, effectively ensuring his dominance. Unlike Somerset, who overtly used familial ties to assert control, Northumberland skillfully managed the government under the guise of King Edward's sovereignty, presenting it as autonomous in its rule. Now this approach marked a departure from Somerset's more direct assertions of authority and signaled a move towards a bureaucratically controlled regime under Northumberland's stewardship. In military affairs, Northumberland, previously known as Warwick, adopted a more pragmatic stance compared to Somerset's ambitious military campaigns. In 1550, recognizing the financial strain of ongoing military engagements, he negotiated a peace treaty with France that included the cession of Boulogne and the withdrawal of English garrisons from Scotland. In a significant diplomatic gesture in 1551, he secured a betrothal between Edward and Elizabeth of Valois, King Henry II of France's daughter, which was accompanied by Edward's receipt of the knighthood of St. Michael, highlighting a strategic shift towards fostering peace and alliances. Domestically, to avoid the widespread rebellions that marred Somerset's rule, Northumberland established a network of crown representatives, including Lords Lieutenant, to maintain local order and ensure military preparedness. This network also facilitated a steady flow of intelligence back to the central government. Confronting severe financial challenges, Northumberland, with advisors like William Paulet and Walter Mildmay, initially resorted to further debasing the coinage, which worsened the economic instability. However, recognizing the detrimental impact of this approach, he enlisted the expertise of financier Thomas Gresham. By 1552, their efforts to restore currency confidence began showing signs of stabilizing the economy, laying the groundwork for recovery that would continue into the reign of Elizabeth. Furthermore, Northumberland's administration focused on curtailing the prevalent embezzlement within government finances. He initiated a comprehensive review and overhaul of revenue collection practices, which was regarded as one of the Tudor period's most significant administrative reforms. Under Northumberland's leadership, the English government aggressively pursued the Protestant reforms initiated by Somerset. Given Edward's strong Protestant convictions, it was essential for his government to align with religious reform. Throughout Edward's reign, the driving force was the reformist faction, which Edward trusted, particularly figures like Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Cranmer led significant changes that not only moved the Church of England away from papal supremacy, but also reshaped it into a distinctly Protestant institution. Well, in terms of the Church's financial dynamic, that was also transformed. The ongoing confiscation of church property, which had started under Henry VIII with actions like the dissolution of the chantries, proved to be financially advantageous for both the Crown and those who were acquiring the properties. A win-win for everyone except the Church. Thus, the Church reforms during Edward's rule were motivated by both political and religious objectives, leading to a financially weakened Church by the end of Edward's reign, with many ecclesiastical properties shifted into secular hands. The personal religious beliefs of Somerset and Northumberland have been debated by historians, with opinions varying on their commitment to Protestantism. However, Edward's devoutness is less contested. Described by John Fox as a godly imp, and compared to the biblical Josiah, Edward was deeply committed to the Protestant cause. Oh, by the way, go and read The Book of Martyrs by John Fox. It's one of my recommendations. Well, he engaged daily with Scripture and was an avid listener of sermons, often displaying strong resistance to Catholic practices. But despite his devout image, which prominently features in Protestant narratives such as Fox's Acts and Monuments, historians do suggest some caution, suggesting that Edward's transition from traditional Catholic observance to robust Protestant reforms was influenced significantly by Cranmer and other reformist advisors. Now, The Reformation in England was marked by a clash between conservative elements who wished to retain traditional rituals and radical reformers who advocated for sweeping changes, as evidenced by widespread iconoclasm. Amidst this, Archbishop Cranmer undertook the considerable task of creating a unified English liturgy, encapsulated in the Book of Common Prayer of 1549. This new liturgy was intended as a compromise, but it faced resistance from both sides. Traditionalists who mourned the loss of certain rituals, and reformers who criticized the retention of some Catholic elements. Now bear in mind, these are all Christians, just slightly different Christians, still arguing amongst each other. It's not good. Well, the resistance was significant, as demonstrated by the Prayer Book Rebellion in Devon and Cornwall, which resulted in substantial loss of life. Additionally, senior Catholic figures like Bishops Stephen Gardiner and Edmund Bonner, who resisted the new prayer book, were thrown in prison and removed from their positions. As the reforms became more entrenched, doctrines such as justification by faith alone and the provision of communion in both kinds to all followers were established. The Ordinal of 1550 redefined the ordination of priests, shifting from a divine calling to a government appointment. By 1551, Edward, embracing his role as the supreme head of the Church, drove the Reformation forward. Influential reformers like John Hooper and John Knox, who preached against traditional communion practices at court, significantly shaped the period's theological discourse. Notable continental figures such as Martin Bucer and Peter Martyr also lent their expertise to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer's pivotal contributions culminated in the 1552 revision of the Book of Common Prayer, which adopted a distinctly reformist tone, and his development of the 42 Articles, which laid out the doctrinal foundation of the Reformed religion, particularly elucidating the communion service. This revised prayer book, coupled with the enactment of the Second Act of Uniformity, marked a decisive shift towards Protestantism, establishing a more durable framework for the Church of England. However, the trajectory of these reforms faced uncertainty due to the deteriorating health of King Edward, the central figure of the entire Reformation. His impending death in 1553 brought doubts about if his religious policies would continue after he was gone. So, amid all of this religious transformation and political intrigue, including Thomas Seymour's controversial plan to marry Edward to Lady Jane Grey, a significant political alliance was secured through Edward's betrothal to Elizabeth of Valois in 1550. At just 13 years old, Edward was engaged to the 5-year-old daughter of Henry II of France and Catherine de' Medici. This alliance, negotiated with great secrecy, alarmed the Pope, Julius III, who threatened excommunication for Henry II and Elizabeth if the marriage proceeded. The betrothal package included a substantial dowry, highlighting the strategic value of the union. However, the dowry was never paid, as Edward's death in 1553 preempted the marriage. Subsequently, Elizabeth's destiny shifted dramatically as she later married Philip II of Spain, the widower of Mary I, Edward's half-sister. By February 1553, King Edward VI's health had started to decline significantly, and by June of that year, after experiencing several bouts of improvement and worsening conditions, his situation had become dire. A potential death loomed as a significant threat to the continuation of the Reformation, a situation that his council and key officials found deeply concerning due to the possible ascension of his Catholic half-sister Mary. Edward opposed Mary's succession based on religious beliefs, legitimacy, and the principles of male inheritance, the latter also applicable to his other half-sister Elizabeth. Thus, in a determined effort to secure a Protestant succession, Edward drafted a document titled My Device for the Succession, inspired by the precedent set by his father. In this document, he deliberately bypassed the claims of his half-sisters, naming instead his cousin, the 16-year-old Lady Jane Grey, as his successor. Notably, Lady Jane had recently married Lord Guildford Dudley, the son of the Duke of Northumberland, further entwining political and familial alliances. The king's intentions, as expressed in his own words, were as follows. My device for the succession. Number 1. For lack of issue, there was a male inserted above the line but afterwards crossed out, of my body to the issue, male above the line, coming of this issue female, as I have after declared inserted but crossed out. To the L. Francis heirs male, for lack of erased, if she have any inserted such issue before my death inserted, to the Lady Jane's and her inserted heirs male, to the Lady Catherine's heirs males, to the Lady Mary's heirs males, to the heirs males of the daughters which she shall have hereafter, then to the Lady Margaret's heirs males, for such lack of issue, to the heirs males of the Lady Jane's daughters, to the heirs males of Lady Catherine's daughters, and so forth till you come to the Lady Margaret's daughters inserted heirs males. What a word salad, huh? Number 2. If after my death their male be entered into 18 years old, then he to have the whole rule and governance thereof. 3. But if he be under 18, then his mother to be the governess till he enter 18 years old, but to do nothing without the advice and agreement inserted, a 6th parcel of a council to be appointed by my last will to the number of 20. 4. If the mother die before the heir enter into 18, the realm to be governed by the council, provided that after he be 14 all great matters of importance be opened to him. 5. If I died without issue, and there were none male heir, then the Lady Frances to be regent altered to governess. For the lack of her eldest daughters, and for the lack of them the Lady Margaret to be governess after as is aforesaid, till some heir male be born, and then the mother of that child is to be the governess. 6. And if during the rule of the governess there die 4 of the council, then shall she by her letters call an assembly of the council within 1 month following, and choose 4 more, wherein she shall have 3 voices. But after her death the 16 shall choose among themselves, till the heir come to 18 erased 14-year-old, and then B their advice shall choose them. End of the document. Well, as Edward's health deteriorated, he made crucial revisions to his succession document. As we had just noticed, all of those little things crossed out and added in, prioritizing male heirs from Frances Grey, Duchess of Suffolk's lineage, extending to her daughters Lady Jane Grey, Lady Catherine Herbert, and Lady Mary. Originally aimed at male successors, the situation and perhaps Duke of Northumberland's influence led Edward to allow direct succession rights to Lady Jane and her sisters, a deviation meant to secure a Protestant heir. Edward specifically excluded his half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, from the succession, citing their previous declarations of illegitimacy by their father, Henry VIII, which had never been formally reversed. This move contradicted Henry's Third Succession Act of 1544, which had reinstated both Mary and Elizabeth. Thus, critics view these changes as desperate, reflecting a significant effort to continue the Reformation under a Protestant monarch, likely slayed by Northumberland. In early June, Edward meticulously finalized his succession plan, securing his approval across the document. And by mid-June, despite his worsening health, he commanded top judges to formalize his wishes into official letters patent for Parliament's enactment. He soon required his council and legal advisers to commit in writing to uphold his directive, highlighting his determination. Chief Justice Edward Montague recalled that upon raising legal concerns about the succession plan, Northumberland vehemently intimidated the dissenters. The atmosphere intensified, culminating on June 21st, with over 100 signatures obtained on the succession document, under duress, according to later claims. Well, by January 1553, Edward was really 1 foot in the grave at this point, health completely failing, marked by a severe cough and fever as detailed by the imperial ambassador John Shaffife. Now he struggled with breathing difficulties, exacerbated by a diagnosed suppurating tumor in his lung. By June, his condition got even worse, which eventually led to his death on July 6, 1553, at Greenwich Palace, purportedly uttering the final words, "I am faint, Lord have mercy upon me and take my spirit." His funeral was held on August 8, 1553, adhered to by reformed rites led by Thomas Cranmer, and included a procession with an effigy of the young king. He was interred in Westminster Abbey, his grave marked only centuries later by a stone from Christ's Hospital School. Well, thank you very much for listening. Bit of a weird one, Edward VI. Not exactly what people were expecting. But sometimes, in those times and those places, people don't live long enough to see how their reign could have really affected history. Oh well, what can you do? Thank you to the top-tier patrons, Britt Charles, Stark Factory, JC Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Aaron, Scott, Dark, Melissa, and Ben. I'll see you next time, everyone. Lots of love to you all. Good night.